Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Sports Addicts Baseball Edition. Today we have a special guest, former MLB player from the 518, Brendan Harris is joining us. He was a former fifth-round pick in the 2001 draft, and it's going to be an exciting one. Jonah, you want to mention what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, so we're just going to talk about all aspects of his career, how he started his time in Queensbury High School, which we are both very familiar with. We're going to talk about his college career, his major league career, some of the best players he's ever faced and played with. So it should be a really interesting, wide-ranging conversation, and we're really looking forward to talking to Brendan.
All right, so we are joined by Brendan Harris. Brendan, thank you so much for joining us.
Anytime. Good to be here, guys.
So as our listeners may know, you're also from the 518 Queensbury High School. You want to talk about your high school career and how you kind of got scouted? Because you don't see too many players get recruited from the upstate New York area.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it's actually changing a little bit. You're seeing more talent come out of there. I know, Garrett Whitley drafted right out of the first round. I'm drawing a blank on his name now.
Ian Anderson?
Well, yeah, I was going to get to him, but I was going to say the Rockies pitcher, which was a very high pick as well. Starting pitcher, big guy. But yeah, so it was interesting. I played 3 sports in high school up until really my senior year. I think in a lot of ways baseball chose me. Probably basketball would have been, if I had to pick, probably my first love. But kind of topping out at 6'1.5", I think that choice was made for me. But as you know, in the Northeast, there's a shorter season, not as many games, and so playing multiple sports gave me a chance to kind of develop athletically, and also kept me very, very interested in baseball. And I was always looking forward to kind of when baseball season was going to get started. And as I got down to college and as I got into pro ball, I almost saw a lot of guys from Florida, Texas, Southern California. By 25, 28, 27, they're tired. They've been playing all year round, since they were 14, 15 years old. And, they've been on almost a pro schedule for 12 years by the time they're 27, so I always felt like I had more in the tank, and that was kind of a benefit for coming to the Northeast. And you do see that in scouting where they do grade guys as having upside from coming from the Northeast. But really getting into, my baseball career, we always had in Queensbury, we always had really good Little League teams. And so despite maybe the short season, we actually did get a ton of games in going into, playing, whether it's Little League and then Senior League or Babe Ruth or I don't know, Cal Ripken now. But we always got a decent amount of games in. And certainly as I got into high school, we had really good teams as well. Twice we went to the state tournament. So my senior year, we got 32 games in a high school season, which is a lot. So I always got plenty of baseball in. I think I played American Legion ball. And got a little bit more kind of seasoning, in that route. But as I said, kind of the balance for me playing both, really focusing on baseball and basketball, really came until probably the summer before my junior year, where I really kind of said, all right, I got to kind of focus on baseball. And that's when I went, I think I went to the Old Dominion camp, and I think I went to the Best in Virginia camp and down in Virginia, and I went south a little bit to kind of expose myself to different colleges and in the kind of recruiting scene. And that's where I started getting more interest, getting a lot more letters and being, I guess, quasi highly recruited, but, from I would say, South Carolina up to the Northeast. So it wasn't, I got letters from, the ACC, SEC, and a couple Pac-12, Pac-10 at the time schools. But it was always kind of tepid interest, and there wasn't really a serious recruiting effort on their part. But yeah, and they narrowed it down to Brown, Navy, William and Mary, Providence, and Dartmouth. Really. And Providence, ironically, I got a little bit of a weird vibe from, where I didn't know what was going on behind the scenes, and ultimately they did drop baseball. So obviously I was glad I didn't go there. But for me, I wanted to go to the best school first and foremost, and that was number one on my list. Is I was going to use baseball to get into as good a school that as possible. And so hence I really liked Brown and Dartmouth. I thought William and Mary was as close as you could be on terms of their academic reputation. And the other thing for me was I wanted the opportunity to play pretty quickly, or at least compete for a job and in a starting job in a school right away. And so that played into it, and that kind of played itself out with William and Mary.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely really interesting to hear the story of how you got recruited from a place that's not really normally a baseball hotbed, and the places that you got offers from. I mean, and as you said, the 518 is really kind of stepping up its baseball talent. I mean, Tommy Kahnle, I know, who pitched for the Yankees recently. He just signed with the Dodgers in this offseason, but he played at Shaker High School down in Latham. So there have been a bunch of good players from there recently. But yeah, I'm just wondering, from like earlier on, was there someone who you kind of modeled your game after? I know you were primarily an infielder, but I don't know if that's the position you played when you were younger. So was there somebody whose game you really tried to emulate as you came up through the ranks?
Not really. Didn't just there were a ton of players I liked. So I pitched a lot in high school as well. So there are a few pitchers I liked there. But yeah, I was a big Yankee fan growing up, and so Mattingly and Jeter, and then Jeter were kind of fan at the end of Mattingly's career, and then certainly when at the beginning of Jeter's career, when I was starting to get into high school, became a big fan of him. And but certainly there was a little bit of a golden age kind of back at that time with all the young shortstops that came in with Jeter and A-Rod and Nomar. And so I really appreciated the shortstops that could hit. And so every one of them, kind of became a little bit of my model, because I think for 30 years, previously in the game, the shortstop was kind of a purely defensive position. And but getting back to the kind of the recruiting, and something I wanted to add was being from those schools are even today. There's a ton of talent up there, but they're overlooked a lot. So I was pretty aggressive in terms of reaching out to schools. There were my high school coach, Jay Mara, and then there was a scout in my area that kind of said there's some bias of like, hey, I don't know, or maybe it's just an unknown of I don't know what the talent's like in Florida and Texas and some of these other places, so you don't know how you kind of stack up. And they were on me, kind of early on. They said, listen, you kind of raise the bar a little bit. I don't think that you can compete, at this level and this and that. So I just started reaching out to some of these schools. And I would film myself hitting and fielding and make, and it's obviously more common now and easier to do with social media and whatnot. And but I just was pretty confident that I could play there, and I reached out to them. I told them as much. The interesting story, when I went down to one of the best, it was called, I forget where it was, but it's called Best in Virginia for whatever reason. And my sister was a swimmer and signed with UVA, and that was a beautiful campus as well, similar to William and Mary. They're set up very similar. Obviously, there's a Thomas Jefferson overlap too and influence, but I really wanted to go there, and obviously being the ACC as well, a little bit better conference, and the coaches there, and I'd reached out to them previously, had a good week camp there, and they didn't blow me off. They said, we could, offer you this and offer you that. You probably wouldn't play to your junior year. And it was almost somewhat dismissive. And I was like, all right, that's fine. And so, they called me back, and I said, no, I'm not, I don't get the sense that you really want me on your team or at your school. And so we ended up going to William and Mary, and we never lost to them. We beat UVA every year, twice one year. I wish there was a better story where he said something, but the coach got fired, and so it didn't really have an interesting caveat or nugget to it at the end. But That's some of the advice that I tell kids that are coming out of that area is that don't undersell yourself or sell yourself short in terms of where you need to look at schools or who you can what level you can compete at.
So you got drafted in 2001, then obviously went to played at William & Mary. What was the minor league league like before you got called up to the Cubs? Was it like a completely different pace from college? Or what were the big differences that you noticed?
Aside from the pure number of games and how it was every day and bus rides were a little bit longer, competition was a little bit better, it was a lot like college, to be very honest with you. And it really, until you get up to AA, where you're kind of there's coordinators and there's coaches and let's do this and do that and dress, wear a collared shirt and be here on this time and do this. And you got to do things this way. And when I was turning double plays, I always used to go behind the bag, and I just didn't feel like I picked the runner up, and I never wanted to get blown up. And I had a strong arm, so it was easy for me to kind of go behind the bag. And it was, I butted heads with coaches that were like, no, you got to come across the bag. And I was like, why? Why does it matter as long as I'm continually make the plays, And I didn't say that, but it was just the mindset that you have to do it this way kind of permeated the lower tier of the minor leagues. And then you get to AA and you see at that level guys start going to the big leagues. And so it becomes a little bit more open in terms of your autonomy and what, you've obviously figured a few things out and had some success to get to that level. But at the same time, the bus rides were still terrible. The pay was still terrible. The schedule was still awful. And, but it gave you a little bit of a better preview of what it was going to be like when if or when you did get called up.
Yeah, just a quick question about the minor leagues, because that's really a world in baseball that a lot of casual fans don't know that much about, but most professional baseball players in this country are playing in the minor leagues. And so I think that's a huge aspect of baseball and how we get the major league players that everybody knows. So I'm just curious if there's a particular place you played in your minor league career. Like, what was your favorite minor league city that you played in?
Though it's different because I said they treat you a little bit better. I would say Des Moines. Des Moines was great. They actually had great fan base. It's 3.5 hours maybe from Chicago, and so there's a big Cubs contingent that go to that. It was a nice park. Des Moines was a good little city. So that was a fun place. Daytona was okay. I had a good year there, but I always remember it was just, being in Florida all summer. It's just just hot, and you're always on a high alert or we'll see what happens with the rain, right? In terms of like the game time, are we going to start on time or not? You're always on kind of waiting around for that in that whole league. But I'd say Des Moines was good. Daytona was good. Jackson, Tennessee was the only one that left a lot to be desired, which was a tough summer.
So skipping ahead to when he got called up, I think it was 2004, and then you almost immediately got traded for a player you said you looked up to, Nomar Garciaparra, went to the Cubs. What was that like, being traded after like 3 games with the Cubs? And like, what was the whole trading process like in switching cities?
Interesting, because at the trading deadline, we were there. We were kind of watching on TV, and then I'd been sent back down a couple days before, so we were in Des Moines, and so I get sent back down, and I got called in the office, and so the team actually goes out to stretch, and so we're stretching out in the outfield, and manager calls me in, and I'm thinking they made a trade, and I got called up, and so he says, "Hey, you've been traded," and he goes, "It's a 14 deal." He goes, I'm really embarrassed to tell you. He goes, "I don't know where you're going." He goes, "You're either going to Montreal or Minnesota. It's a 14 deal." He goes, "And you're not going to Boston." I said, "All right." And so, which was kind of funny in that I ended up eventually, obviously, going to Minnesota. So end up finally getting the information. They're like, hey, you're going to go to Montreal. You're going to go to their AAA, which is in Edmonton. Get a call from their assistant GM. Hey, glad to have you, blah, blah, blah. And it was very kind of, the whole process was very impersonal for the way that I was drafted. You've made friends with these guys, and it was a really kind of rude awakening to the business side of it. And it was kind of like a few handshakes and calls of like, at least on the Cubs side, of like, hey, thanks for your effort and good luck to you, kind of like this. And I'm like, now that's it, and so, and then it's a complete pain. And you think about the logistics. I'd rent an apartment there and rented furniture. I had utilities going in Des Moines. So, not only do I have to go back, pack my stuff, and be at this next place in the next day and a half, which, funny enough, Edmonton was on the road in Nashville at their AAA. So I met them there, and their place they went right after that, Des Moines. So I would get back on the bus. I go back to Des Moines. I stay in my apartment, which I still have there. My car was still there. I drove to the park. I just drove to the other locker room. And I was an Adidas guy still, the Cubs were blue. So I'm with the black stuff. I still wearing like blue cleats. So it was interesting. It was a peek behind, or a kind of a peek into the business side of the game. And, but at the same time, it was, hey, there's an opportunity there. It's the small market team like that. A young player looks at it like, I'm going to get a great opportunity. So I was excited for it, and certainly, being closer to, Queensbury, a couple hours from Montreal, figuring I'd get called up at a certain point, it was all good for me.
Yeah, I mean, you can see just from hearing your story, like how much moving around is involved in being a baseball player, especially early on in your career. But I think you had sort of a unique opportunity to experience that being in Montreal and a member of the Expos. When the franchise moved to Washington, you had to move without even switching teams. So what was it like playing in Montreal in such a very different environment from any other major league city? Like, what was that like? And then after that, what was it like moving with the team to Washington?
Yeah, I got called up. I mean, maybe I was 23, 24, excited to be there, excited at the opportunity. Major League Baseball had handled that so terribly in terms of their relationship with this city and the fans. And they had threatened to move there for years. They took those games away. They put like some in Puerto Rico, and they've been, back and forth about the ballpark. And so there was a really disgruntled fan base. And in that kind of organization wise, it seeped in as well, where the team struggled. Omar Manai was the GM. He was rumored to be going with the Mets. And so funny enough, our last series as the Expos was in New York, and he announced that we go out to stretch, and he's just on the other side of the field where he became the Mets GM. And so the atmosphere was, I was really excited to be there, but it was, I guess, a tougher, kind of energy to walk into. But I liked the city. The last weekend of the year, they were all sellouts, and they were fun. I think, and I still do think, with a new park and, kind of a downtown area, and I think baseball could, survive and thrive there in Montreal. But moving to Washington, it was pretty much well known even before they announced it that that's what's going to happen. And so you kind of stay out of the kind of political wranglings of, when or where you're going to play or any of that. And that just gets into, it was interesting. I had, a lot of friends there from William and Mary that were going to be in that area. So I was excited on that. But it was a just kind of control what you can control type situation where, you knew they were going to move, but that didn't stop you from being prepared going into spring training the following year.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting story about Montreal. I mean, I'm obviously from this area also, and I'm a Mets fan. And So when I was a little kid, that was the closest place that I could go with my dad and see the Mets. So I went up to Montreal for a couple of games. I was there in 2004 in that last season. And yeah, I mean, the stadium experience was definitely not what it could have been. I'm sure that was an improvement once you got to Washington. But yeah, so I know Todd had another question. So
Did I? You want to go ahead and ask it? Because I don't know what you're talking about.
well, yeah, I mean, just in terms of your major league career, you ended up with a lot of different franchises over your time there. You were with the Yankees organization for a time. You didn't end up playing in the major leagues for the Yankees, I don't think, but was that sort of a thrill being a part of the organization that you were a fan of growing up as a kid? Like, was that especially big for you to sign with the Yankees?
Yeah, I think that was 13 where I think I got sent down from the Angels and then signed with the Yankees. And I think, ironically, that was A-Rod was coming back from a suspension, and there were some injuries. So I was only there for a brief time, but yeah, it was cool to kind of put the pinstripes on, albeit even in Scranton, which oddly was a really tough place to hit, really deep park, and I remember thick grass yeah, I always grew up a Yankee fan, and it was kind of a good opportunity. And I remember, I think I took an out in the contract I had again. I went to Texas at the end of the year, but yeah, it was a good experience.
So towards the end of your career, you signed a lot of minor league contracts that seemed like short 1-year deals. When did you know it was time just to step away from the game?
Yeah, people ask you all the time, when did you retire? And it's an interesting way to put it, where another way to put it was when they stop offering you jobs. And so getting towards the end of the career, there was a little bit of a reaction in the post-steroid era to how late into your mid or late 30s GMs or personnel think that you can play. It's starting to come back now with the kind of, certainly rise in nutrition and the new training techniques where guys are healthier and more flexible and have better range of motion and are going to be able to play longer. But at that point, I think it was 34, 35. I think utility jobs were the only jobs I was going to probably have an opportunity for, and there weren't as many teams. There was also a little bit of a shift in narrative. You saw Houston do it. You saw the Cubs do it, where if they weren't going to at least compete for the division and go to the playoffs, they just I don't want to say tanked, but they only played young guys, and so they didn't bring in any veterans almost at all. So that kind of shrunk the number of jobs as well. And so I kind of looked at the landscape, and I think in the off season after 2015, after playing for the Tigers organization, I did still want to play. I kind of had some smaller injuries that oddly throughout the off season, I felt like I got healthy again. So I was somewhat looking to play, but I definitely thought that, the next opportunity was coming sooner rather than later. So during that off season, I set 2 tracks. One, I wanted to go back to business school. The other was going to still work out and talk to teams. And I did have some dialogue with teams, but nothing ever materialized. And then I got the call. So I went through, the GMAT and the interviews and essays and everything for business school at Columbia, Wharton, and NYU. And I got the call from Wharton. And so I was really excited to hear that I got in, but I hung up the phone. I remember thinking, okay, I guess that's the end of my baseball career and an interesting way to retire. So that's kind of how it came together. It was a dual track, and this new opportunity came up that I wanted to pursue.
Yeah, so just looking back on your career in general, not necessarily about one specific stop there, but you hit 33 home runs in your major league career. I'm curious if there's one of those home runs that really sticks out in your memory in particular, one really special one that was important or interesting for whatever reason.
Your first. You remember the first in Marlins Park down there in Miami, and I think it was a back end of a doubleheader. I don't even know if the game was televised, but and they give you the kind of silent treatment when you come back into the bench. But I also remember hitting one over the monster and off Tim Wakefield and feeling pretty special, like, rolling around the bases, thinking, man, I just hit one over the monster. So those are probably two of the ones that stick out.
Speaking of some memorable moments, I don't know, I'm sure you obviously realize this, but you were the last batter ever in the Minnesota Metroplex Dome. Was that special for you in any way?
More infamous, I guess, or an answer to a trivia question, but it was the playoffs of the Yankees, and it was interesting. I was up; they had taken the lead. It was actually a really tight series, and they had taken the 1-0 lead, and Rivera came in, and I remember thinking, "Damn it, I'm in the hole." And then also thinking they're going to close this place down, and the last picture is going to be me, doing this or that. And so I remember getting up there and thinking, all right, it's still a 1-run game, so I still want to get on base and, just keep the line moving and this and that. And then so I get up in the count 2-0, and I step out, and I'm thinking, all right, what am I looking for? Am I going to take a pitch? And amazing in the 6 seconds that I'm kind of fixing my bat angles, something flashes in my head that what's going to happen. You're going to take a pitch, you're going to foul a pitch off, and then he's going to elevate a cutter, and you're going to be in the last pitch of the series, and the metronome is going to be you punching out. And so I get back in there, and I'm like, all right, I'm not taking a pitch. I'm going to swing. I ended up, hitting a one hopper to shortstop. But that was the thought process. And I did factor in. I said, I'm not going down with the last picture of the metronome being me punching out. So yeah, I'm well aware of that. It's played on a couple of jumbotrons of stadiums years since that as a fun fact type thing. But yeah, I was well aware of that.
So throughout your career, was there one particular pitcher that you faced who you consider the toughest to hit against? Because, I mean, obviously a lot of great players pitched in your era, but is there one who stands out as like the toughest guy to hit?
Yeah, there were two really. It was Verlander, because Verlander for years was in the Central Division, and we had to face him, and just power stuff. And he was that type where he oddly got stronger as the game went on, and would be hitting 98 in the 8th inning, and so he was really tough. Just his ball just really just exploded out of his hand, and it was tough to get on top of. And then he had good breaking ball as well. But later in my career, towards the end of my career, I faced Chris Sale, and that was as difficult a lefty as I've ever faced. It was just all arms and legs coming at you, and he had just this frisbee slider that could really embarrass you. And the type where that kind of Randy Johnson type where you can swing and miss and it can kind of hit you in the back foot. Or ironically, an ex-teammate of mine, Mark Trumbo, I saw he got hit. He struck out and it hit him in the quad. And it just kept breaking in and burying it on his back leg. But so those are the two that really, really stick out. And obviously there's many others. But those are the two probably at the top of my list.
You touched upon this a bit earlier, saying how players today are more athletic than, I guess, your era. I was wondering what the other differences are between today's game and when you played that you noticed.
Yeah, speaking, athletic and then versatile are two things that are teams are always looking for good athletes, but in terms of versatility, this would have been great. When I was in the middle of my career, where if you couldn't really just kind of produce every day at one position, you became a utility guy, and versatility wasn't looked at as the bonus that it is now in terms of so many games in strategy. Today is dictated on matchups, and so versatility is valued far more than it used to be, and the ability to play not only kind of multiple positions within the infield, but infield and outfield. So that's one of the big differences is that I think there's a value on being able to play multiple positions and not held against you. And that has to do with a lot of the strategy that's kind of changed in the game in terms of the shifts and as much information and, that goes into in the same information was always there, and hasn't changed that drastic in the last couple of years or since I played. But they're just shifting on every guy and even within the counts. And that you didn't see. You see guys, in more of an offensive count, they kind of do this more, when they get even, they get down in the count. And it's so much so that you see a lot of outfielders and infielders now where they have a little card in their back pocket and they pull it out and they're looking, during the game on where they have to shift. But so strategies changed a little bit like that. And then also I think it's harder today than ever to probably hit 300 with the amount of pitching changes there are, the relievers that are coming in, the velocity that these guys are coming in with. I think the ability to hit 300 is probably harder than it's ever been. Now, obviously, getting on base and power are much more valued, and so it's not hitting 300 isn't as valued as it was back even a couple of years ago. But I think it's harder in a lot of ways. Certainly, the harder balls or the new balls that they're using seem to go a little farther. But I think what's coming out of a lot of guys' hands is more difficult than it's been in years.
Yeah, I'm curious what you think of like those changes to the game that you were talking about, like the shifts and the increasing use of relief pitchers, these stricter pitch counts on pitchers, which you saw crop up in the World Series when Blake Snell was taken out. Like, do you see these really analytics-driven trends? Do you see those as ultimately a good thing for the game or something that the league might have to rein in a little bit?
So there's two parts of that. There's how does what type of product that shows on TV and how that plays for the fans, and then how it does for strategy. So clearly on the strategy side, it worked until it didn't for the Rays. I would say the numbers are what they are, where OPS goes through the roof the third time through the order. That doesn't mean you need to be beholden to that. There's a balance of being able to live in the moment and see that your guy's dominating, and also in that moment with the Rays, he's got a taxed bullpen already, so the arms that he's bringing in aren't going to be better than that. So a little more flexibility on that side would be better, but certainly for the product, for the fan, this is one part where it is a slower, frustrating game to watch. There's just too much dead time. There's too much swing and miss. I get it, like the stuff coming out of these guys in the pen. And you saw with the Rays, there's guys, 97 to 100. Everybody coming out of the pen is throwing gas. But it's not as good of a product to watch. It's longer, it's slower. And, the dead time, there's a lot of excuses made to why ratings, can kind of go down. And it's not, and part of it is that there's a lot more pulls on people's attention. And, baseball isn't competing with football or basketball. It's competing with Netflix Prime and video games and, a bunch of other things. And so that's one of the reasons. And the second reason is it's not, that people have shorter attention spans. People are binge watching shows for 6 hours a day. They're playing video games for 6 hours a day. Like, people will commit to something. It's the quality content, right? And so they will lock in on something if it is engaging. And so the game day experience and lack of and too much dead time in the game is really affecting the amount of people that are going to watch it. Yeah, people are busier. So if the way they consume baseball, whether it's streaming or even in small snippets, if they can, check in for a couple innings, if they can get alerts on when Mike Trout's coming to the plate or bases loaded, and they can check in, that way, that might be one way to solve it. But, people just aren't sitting down and watching 3 hours from the game on their, kind of local station like they used to. But so I don't know. I think it's a little bit of a push in terms of, good and bad.
Yeah, kind of going off that. I'm curious to know how much baseball you watch to this day, because obviously you have a love for the game, but also it's taken up a majority of your life. Do you still watch as much as you can, or you kind of just watch here and there, take a little break from
I watch here and there. I'm still a fan. I love the players that play the position I did just a lot better. Like Javi Baez and Frank Lindor, and there's some great shortstops that I like to watch play, and third base like Donaldson and Arenado are great. But now with the job I have with X10 Capital, we invest in guys, and so literally do kind of have skin in the game. And so I'm really glued on our guys, and I kind of invested interest in them. And that's kind of changed the way I've watched the game. But to your point, I think first couple of years after I played, I really didn't. I watched almost none, and it was just kind of hit a refresh for me, and just I candidly didn't have the time being in school to sit down and watch a lot of baseball. But I took a little break from it, but certainly now I'm very engaged again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious, like, in your engagement with the game, I know you may have a little bias because you worked in player development for the Angels after you retired, but I'm curious, besides Mike Trout, let's put him aside, who would you say is the best player in the league today?
Like I said, I'm still Lindor. I think he's
That's good
phenomenal.
news for me as a Mets fan, for sure.
Yeah. Probably Bellinger too. And Mookie Betts, fantastic. There's a lot of premium talent. Yeah, I mean, and I'm biased again. Starting pitching is an integral part of a team. They're never going to be the most valuable player. In rare occasions should they be the MVP, and these everyday guys are some of the guys. JT Realmuto is very incredibly valuable, kind of an underrated player, behind the dish, and I'm still a little bit old school, and I think kind of those up the middle positions are the premium value in terms of shortstop, second base, center field, and behind the dish. But yeah, some of those guys, I'm probably missing a couple guys. Trevor Story, a big fan of his.
So I kind of want to get into your post-playing career. I was curious if you would want to share what you did with the Angels and also kind of what you're doing now with X10 Capital.
Yeah, so out of school, or going into school, I did the executive program, which allows you the flexibility to kind of get into other things. And I did somewhat want to stay affiliated with the game, potentially go the GM route. Working for the Angels was a really good experience. Being able to analyze and scout talent, but then also develop talent is a skill that's harder than it looks. At the same time, it made me realize I really don't want to work for a team. I needed to wash my hands with working in or with Major League Baseball. And that was part of the reason I wanted to go back to school. I wanted to kind of open up more opportunities for myself. And then I got connected with 76 Capital, which is a sports tech venture capital firm. Ryan Howard, the old Phillies first baseman's firm. Loved it. Loved the whole venture scene. Loved how sports science, data, tech can be applied to kind of human performance and everything affiliated with that. And sports tech really was just, to me, healthcare and media. And so I don't understand why they kind of narrowed it and said sports tech. I felt like it was kind of limiting. And I thought it was more scalable than people give it credit to. I mean, you look at some of these whether it's Peloton, Hydro, and some of these other things that are valuations are mirror going to tonal, going through the roof. Then started working with them, got affiliated, started working with one of their portfolio companies, Diamond Kinetics, which is a baseball, softball technology company with smart balls and bat sensor technology. Great company, great leadership. Still somewhat working with them in my new gig. Got hired by X10, which is a private equity company, and we invest in at this time MLB and NFL players at early stages of their careers for percentage of future earnings. It's a straight equity play, just like as a normal kind of private equity deal does. It's a capital infusion up front for a percentage of equity, and it's been fantastic experience. Really good leadership as well. Two GPs, Buck French and Dave Byrne, and we're getting into our second fund, probably end of Q1 this year, or this early this year. And work on kind of the development side of, though we all help kind of do deal flow or scout guys or analyze or help price the players that we're going to try to do deals with. But I primarily work on the performance side. So anything, whether it's kind of strength and conditioning or movement quality or recovery, nutrition, biomechanics, data analysis, or kind of mental performance. So everything that we can kind of put in that performance bucket that our guys are going to need in the off season or in season, I really kind of just, establish relationships with and help them with. And we're in an interesting spot because our interests are aligned with our guys, where we want them to play long and get paid. Where the team is, yes, they want them to play well, but they're going to look to, kind of skimp on the price, in a lot of ways. So we have we're a little bit of an arm's length in terms of we're never going to use data against them, and so we're only looking to help them. And so it's been a, really good opportunity.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap this up soon. I don't want to take too much of your time here, but I did want to ask just one more fun question at the end. Is there one teammate from your career who was like the funniest teammate or the best teammate or like the best clubhouse guy? Like who's somebody that you really enjoyed playing with during your career?
There were probably three, if I had to narrow it down. And so Johnny Gomes in Tampa, fantastic teammate. And a lot of the stories probably aren't fit for a podcast, but just really, really good guy, fun guy, and but played hard. Came to play every day, and really good guy. Actually, before that was Ryan Dempster when I got called up with the Cubs. Was a little bit of a mentor to me. Again, like really good guy. And he actually runs and was kind of a poor, I don't want to say poor man's comedian, but he was not just funny, he was legit like comedian type funny in terms of how he could kind of narrate things in his presentation. And so now he does something for the Cubs kind of off the mound with Ryan Dempster, and it's a kind of a late night talk show, baseball late night talk show host, and he's very good at that, so it's kind of right up his alley. And then with the Twins, I'd say Mike Redmond, who was the just kind of classic salty veteran, really funny, good guy, veteran clubhouse guy, but just really good teammate. But and all these guys were the type where and not every player does this, they get outside themselves and they look at, what everybody else is going through a little bit. And so they legitimately see how, other guys are playing, doing, and feeling, and, kind of make genuine kind of connections and friendships with them. So, sorry to, not give you one, but those are a couple.
No, it's good.
So that will just about do it from us. Is there anything that you want to talk about quickly that we didn't get a chance to touch upon?
Not that I know of. Is there Saratoga going to be back open this summer or what?
I sure hope so. I missed the track.
No, yeah, that's still to be determined. Hopefully we get this vaccine out soon enough and we can have some fans in baseball stadiums by the end of the year too. So that's what we're hoping for.
Absolutely.
All right. Brendan Harris, thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem. Thanks for having me, guys.